The night she entered, the wind outside screamed like a wounded animal. Snow hammered against the windows, and the whole house shook with the cold. John sat alone by the fireplace, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. It was the kind of winter night that kept even wild animals hiding in their dens. No sane person would be out there, not in this storm. But then he heard it, a sound, faint but clear, coming from the kitchen. It wasn't the creak of wood or the howl of wind. It was softer, almost like the scrape of metal against wood. His eyes narrowed. He put down the mug and reached for the flashlight he kept by the table. John lived far from the town, deep in the countryside. There hadn't been a visitor in weeks. If someone was inside his house now, it didn't come with good intentions. He moved slowly, his boots silent on the wooden floor. The sound came again this time, followed by a low gasp. He stepped into the kitchen and froze. There, crouched near the counter, was a figure, small, trembling, wrapped in rags that looked more like strips of old cloth than real clothing. Her skin was pale, almost glowing in the dim light. Her hair fell in tangled strands over her face, and her lips were a deep shade of blue from the cold. She turned to him. Her eyes were unlike any he had seen, large, luminous, and filled with fear. She pressed herself against the wall as if trying to disappear. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I can cook. I can clean. I can bear your children. Just don't throw me out." John's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't sure what shocked him more, the fact that a strange girl had broken into his home, or the strange, desperate words she had just spoken. Her hands clutched at the ragged cloth over her chest, and he noticed frostbite starting on her fingers. She was shivering so hard he could hear her teeth clatter. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice low but firm. Her eyes darted toward the door, then back to him. "I have nowhere else to go," she said. The wind outside howled louder, rattling the windows as if the night itself wanted to pull her back out. Her knees buckled and she collapsed to the floor. John rushed forward, instinct overriding suspicion. He caught her before her head hit the ground, feeling the freezing chill in her skin. "You're half frozen," he muttered. She tried to speak again, but her words were slurred. John lifted her easily. She was so light it felt wrong. He carried her into the living room and laid her near the fireplace. Wrapping her in a thick wool blanket, the girl closed her eyes and sighed softly. As if the heat itself was a miracle, he watched her closely, up close. He could see faint silver markings on her skin, curling like delicate tattoos along her neck and arms. They weren't human, not in design or texture. Her ears were slightly pointed, and a faint shimmer of her pupils caught the firelight in a way no human eyes did. She was alien, no doubt about it. John sat back, unsure of what to do. He had heard of aliens visiting trade ports and big cities, but never here. Never. In the rural snowfields, why would one break into his home, dressed in rags, and beg not to be thrown out? The girl's breathing slowed as warmth began to return to her. When she opened her eyes again, they held something between fear and hope. "You're human," she said softly, almost like it was something rare. "Yes," he replied, still cautious. "Then I'm safe." "For now," she whispered. John frowned. Safe from what? She hesitated, as if the answer was dangerous. "From them," she said finally. Looking toward the window before he could ask who them was, she added, "If they find me, they will take me back. And I will not survive." Her voice cracked on the last word. John leaned forward. "Who are you running from?" She only shook her head, biting her lip. Then, with surprising calm, she repeated, "Please, keep me here. I will work. I will serve. I will be anything you want me to be." John didn't like the sound of that. He didn't want a servant, and he didn't like the fear in her voice. "You don't need to say that," he told her. "I'm not going to throw you out in this weather." She looked at him for a long moment, as if judging whether he was lying. Finally, she nodded. Her lips curved into the smallest, most fragile smile. Then her body relaxed completely. And before John could say another word, she whispered, "One last thing. Thank you, Master." And then she went limp, drifting into unconsciousness. John sat there, staring at her, somewhere in the back of his mind. He knew his life had just changed, but he didn't yet know how dangerous that change was going to be. The stranger story: when John woke the next morning, the storm had passed. Pale sunlight leaked through the curtains, making the snow outside glow like white fire. The fire in the hearth had burned low during the night, but its warmth still lingered in the air. For a moment, he wondered if what happened last night had been a dream. Then he saw her, the girl from the night before, still wrapped in the thick wool blanket, lying on the rug near the fireplace. Her breathing was steady now, her face a little less pale, but the strange silver markings on her skin shimmered faintly in the light. Proof she was no ordinary runaway. John poured hot water into a cup and set it near her. The smell of something warm must have reached her, because she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, and for a second she looked around in confusion. Then her gaze landed on him, and she pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "You didn't throw me out," she said softly, as if still surprised. "I said I wouldn't," John replied, sitting in the chair opposite her. There was silence for a while, the kind that was heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, he asked, "Who are you? And why were you in my house?" Haze tightened around the blanket. "My name." She hesitated. "It's hard to say in your language." "You can call me Leary." John nodded slowly. "All right, Leary. Now the rest." Her eyes flickered to the window, scanning the snow outside, almost as if she expected someone to be there. "I ran," she said finally, her voice shaking. "I ran from the house I was given to. My people. They trade girls between powerful houses, like animals. Like property." John's jaw tightened. She took a shaky breath. "I was given to a man who already had many women. I was just another object to him. If I spoke without permission, I was punished. If I didn't obey fast enough, I was punished." Her voice cracked, and she swallowed before continuing. "One night, I heard them speak about selling me to the mines. That's where they send the useless ones." She didn't explain what happened in the mines, but the way her voice broke told John enough. "I escaped before they could take me there. I've been hiding for days. Until the storm came," she glanced at him, "and then I saw your house. I thought maybe a human would be different." John leaned back in his chair, trying to process what he was hearing. He had heard rumors about alien customs, how some species treated women like valuable objects, others like tools. But hearing it directly from her was different. "Why did you say those things last night?" he asked. "About cooking, cleaning, children?" Her eyes lowered, shame flickering across her face. "Because in my world, if a man takes you in, you must offer something to earn his protection. That's the only way to survive." John shook his head. "That's not how it works here." Leary looked up sharply. "Then why would you keep me? You don't know me. I could be dangerous. I'll take my chances," he said simply, for the first time. She looked unsure, most like she didn't know how to respond to kindness without a price. She sipped from the cup he'd given her, wincing at the heat before taking another careful drink. After a moment, she said something strange. "In my people's law, if a man shelters a woman through the winter, she belongs to him for life. No one can take her without his permission." John frowned. "Belongs to him. You make it sound like ownership, not protection. To us, they are the same thing." She replied quietly, "But if you claim me, they cannot take me back. Even the house leaders must obey that rule." John didn't know what to say. He wasn't looking to own anyone, but the thought that this rule could protect her from whoever was hunting her. It stayed in his mind. Who exactly is looking for you? Hay asked. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the cup down. The man they gave me to, and his hunters. They will not stop. They will search the forests, the towns. Even here, the way she said it made his skin prickle. Outside, the snow reflected the sunlight so brightly it was almost blinding. But Leary's eyes were fixed on the shadows. She glanced toward the window again and whispered, "They might have already found me." John followed her gaze, and his stomach sank. There, half hidden behind a tree at the edge of the property, was a figure tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy coat and a hood pulled low. Even from this distance, John could feel the weight of their stare. "They're here," Leary said, her voice trembling. He stood, moving to block her view of the window. "Stay here." "Don't move," he said firmly. "What will you do?" she asked, fear in her eyes. "Find out what they want," he replied. Though he already had a good guess, before she could protest, there was a sharp knock at the door. Not the hesitant kind a neighbor might give, but the heavy, deliberate thud of someone who expected to be let in. Leary gripped the blanket tighter, her knuckles turning white. "They will lie," she whispered. "They will say I am a thief. Or worse." "Don't believe them." The knock came again, louder this time. John stepped toward the door, his mind racing. He didn't know Leary well, and he didn't know how much of her story was the full truth. But he knew one thing for certain. If he opened that door, his quiet life in the countryside was about to change forever. The knock at the door echoed through the small wooden house. It wasn't polite, it wasn't patient, it was a demand. John's hand hovered near the handle, his mind working fast. Behind him, Leary crouched lower on the rug, clutching the blanket so tightly it looked like she was trying to vanish inside it. Another knock, heavier this time. "John?" A voice called, low and steady. "No, you're in there. We just want to talk." The accent was strange words, clipped and sharp, like they weren't made for human mouths. John glanced back at Leary. Her face had gone pale again. "That's them," she whispered. "Hunters." John hesitated. If he ignored them, they might force their way in if he opened the door. He risked them seeing Leary. He decided on a middle ground. He would step outside and keep them away from her. He opened the door just enough to slip through and stepped onto the porch. Two figures stood in the snow, both wearing heavy dark coats and fur-lined boots. One was tall and broad-shouldered, the other slightly shorter but with a predator's sharp movements. Their hoods were pulled low, but John caught glimpses of pale, scaled skin under the shadows. Their eyes were narrow, reflecting the morning light like the surface of a blade. "Morning," John said flatly, his breath steaming in the cold. The taller one nodded slowly. "We are searching for someone." A girl, small silver markings on her skin. John's face remained neutral. "Haven't seen anyone like that?" The shorter one stepped forward, his voice carrying a sharper edge. "She is dangerous. She is stolen from her house. We have orders to bring her back." John leaned against the porch railing, feigning casualness. "Dangerous? She's just one girl. What could she possibly do to you?" The tall one's jaw tightened. "That is not your concern, human. You see her, you will hand her over." "It is?" Law. John's lips curved slightly. "Funny thing about laws, you're not in your territory here." The shorter hunter's eyes narrowed. "Be careful, human. She will use you. She will promise loyalty, then betray you." John thought of Leary's trembling hands, her quiet, desperate voice, and the way she had nearly frozen to death on his floor. "She doesn't seem like much of a threat to me," he said coolly. Both hunters went silent for a moment, the snow crunching softly under their shifting feet. Finally, the taller one spoke again. "We will search the forest today. If you find her, remember our warning." With that, they turned and walked away, boots sinking into the snow, but the shorter one looked back once before disappearing into the trees. His gaze cold and sharp, like a promise. John waited until their shapes vanished beyond the tree line before stepping back inside. Leary was still huddled by the fireplace, her wide eyes locked on him the moment he entered. "They're gone for now," he told her. She exhaled shakily. "You told them nothing." "I told them I hadn't seen you," he replied. "But they'll be back." Her hands gripped the blanket tighter. "They will not give up. They will search again. If they cannot take me by law, they will take me by force." John sat across from her. "Then we need to make sure they can't get close enough." She looked at him, her voice trembling. "You don't understand. If they take me back, I will not live. They will make sure of it." John studied her for a long moment. Her fear wasn't the kind that came from being caught in a light, was the kind that came from knowing exactly what waited at the end of the chase. "Then we'll keep you hidden," he said finally. "At least until we figure out something better, for a moment." Something shifted in her expression, a faint flicker of relief. Then her eyes softened. "Why are you helping me?" John shrugged. "Because I don't like bullies. And I don't like people thinking they can take whatever they want." Her lips trembled into the smallest smile. But it faded quickly as she glanced toward the window again. "John," she whispered, "they will watch you now, every step you take, every place you go. If you're not careful, they'll follow you back here." "I can handle that," he said. Though he knew it wouldn't be easy, he'd seen the way those hunters moved, silent, patient. Like predators in the snow, they could wait days, weeks, even months for the right moment. Leary hesitated, then leaned forward. Her voice barely audible. "There is one way to stop them from taking me. But it's not something you will want to do." John raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "In my people's law, if you claim me as your life-bonded mate, they cannot take me without your permission." John blinked. "Mate, as in married?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, but it is not like your marriage. It is a contract of ownership and protection." "Oh, you would own me?" John felt a knot form in his stomach. He didn't like the idea of owning anyone. But the thought of those hunters dragging her away into the snow was worse. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the window, where the white world outside seemed calm again, but he knew it was only the surface. Somewhere in the forest, the hunters were already circling back, and next time, they wouldn't just knock. Learning her ways, the next few days passed quietly, at least on the surface. The hunters didn't return to the door, but John could feel their presence sometimes. When he stepped outside to chop wood, he caught the faintest shift in the tree line, snow falling from a branch where no wind had touched it, a flicker of shadow moving between the pines. They were still watching, waiting. Inside, Leary kept herself busy. She insisted on cooking every meal, even though she barely knew human ingredients the first morning. She boiled eggs with their shells still on and tried to mash them into bread dough. When John pointed out the problem, she looked genuinely confused. "In my world," she explained, "eggs are eaten whole, shell and all. It is efficient," she cleaned, too, but in strange, ritual-like ways. Instead of dusting the shelves, she touched each object in a careful sequence, murmuring words in her language. When John asked, she told him it was to keep bad spirits from following the scent of my trail. He didn't believe in such things, but he didn't stop her. She was calmer when she did it. And in this tense, watchful silence, calm was valuable. Sometimes he found her near the fireplace, staring at the flames. Once, he sat beside her and asked what she was thinking. "I am thinking about warmth," she said softly. In the houses, only the favored wives had access to the heat chambers. The rest slept cold. Her voice grew quieter. "I thought I would never feel warm again." John didn't know what to say to that. He noticed she flinched whenever the wind howled too loudly outside. She also startled easily when he entered. A room without making noise. Whatever life she'd left behind. It had trained her to expect punishment, not kindness, one evening. While John was mending a broken chair leg, Leary sat nearby, her eyes tracing the movements of his hands. "You work with wood like my people work with stone," she said. He smirked. "And you work with food like my people work with." Chaos. She tilted her head, unsure if it was an insult or a joke, then gave a tiny laugh. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh, not the nervous, polite sound she sometimes made, but something real. After dinner, she brought out a small object from beneath her blanket. It was a thin silver band, slightly bent. "This was mine," she said, turning it in her fingers, "from my birth house. Before I was traded away." John leaned forward. "What is it?" "A token. It has my blood signature. With it, I can prove who I am." "And who are you?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. "I am the unwanted daughter of a house leader. He had many children. I was an extra." Her tone was matter of fact, but her eyes betrayed the old pain. John leaned back, thinking, "Does this token mean anything to the hunters?" "Yes," she said. "If they take it, they can erase me from the records. It would be like I never existed." "Then we keep it safe," he said firmly. She looked at him strangely. "Why?" "Most would throw it away." "I am no one important." "You're important enough for me to keep alive," he replied without thinking. Her expression softened at that. But before she could speak, something caught her attention. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing. "They're closer tonight," she whispered. John frowned. "You can hear them?" "Yes. My people can feel the vibrations of footsteps in the ground." She looked toward the window. 2 of them, maybe 3. Moving around the back, John rose quietly, taking the rifle from above the mantel. "Stay here," he said. But when he turned, she was already standing, her blanket falling away to reveal her thin frame. "You can't go out alone," she insisted. "They might try to separate us." "They won't," John said firmly. "Not tonight." He stepped outside into the cold, the snow crunching under his boots. The forest was still too still. Then he saw it, a faint glimmer between the trees. Like the reflection of moonlight on metal, it disappeared a second later, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps. John stayed out there for nearly an hour, but the hunters didn't return. When he came back inside, Leary was waiting by the door. Her eyes searched his face as if checking for wounds. "They didn't try anything," he said, setting the rifle back on the wall, "for now," she replied quietly, "but they are learning your patterns. They will wait until you are far from the house, or until you sleep." John poured himself a cup of coffee, trying to mask the unease creeping into his chest. The hunters were patient, and patience was dangerous. Leary seemed to sense his thoughts. "That is why I offered to be life bonded," she said. "If you claim me, they will have to challenge you in the open. They prefer the shadows. It will force them to stop hiding." John didn't answer right away. He stared into his cup, steam curling upward like thin ghosts. He wasn't ready to bind himself to someone he barely knew, but he also wasn't ready to see her dragged away screaming into the snow. "For now," he only said, "we'll figure it out." Leary nodded, but the look in her eyes said she didn't believe him. The chase and night started calm. The fire in the hearth burned low, the house wrapped in a soft, quiet warmth. John sat at the table, whittling a piece of wood. Leary was curled on the rug near the fireplace, tracing shapes in the air with her fingers, strange symbols from her language. Outside, the snow fell in slow, silent sheets. Then, the peace shattered. A faint click came from the back door, not the sound of wind or settling wood. John froze, knife still in his hand. Leary's head snapped toward the noise, her silver-marked skin seeming to tighten with alertness. "They're here," she whispered, her voice low and sharp. Before John could move, the back door burst open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of snow and something metallic. Two figures stepped inside Hunters, their hoods low, their movements fast. The one in front carried a curved blade that shimmered even in the dim light. The other held something. Like a net made of glimmering wires. "Run!" John barked, grabbing the rifle from the wall. Leary darted toward the front door, bare feet silent on the wooden floor. The Hunters lunged, the net hissing through the air as it missed her by inches. John fired once, not to hit, but to force. Then back, the sound roared in the small house, rattling the windows. Leary flung the front door open. The cold hit her like a wall, but she didn't stop. John followed, slamming the door shut behind him just as a blade struck the wood. They ran into the snow, their breath-forming clouds in the freezing air. The world outside was dark, except for the pale moonlight reflecting off the drifts. "Which way?" shouted over the pounding of his boots. "This way." Leary pointed toward the trees. "They can't move as fast in deep snow." The forest loomed ahead, branches heavy with ice. Snow crunched and cracked under their feet. Behind them, the Hunters followed, their steps eerily quiet despite their speed. Every few seconds, John risked a glance back, catching glimpses of shadows slipping between trees. They reached a slope where the snow was deeper, pulling at John's legs like quicksand. Leary moved faster, her light frame letting her skim across the surface with less struggle. She reached back for his hand, her fingers icy but strong. "This way," she urged again, leading him into a narrow path between pines. The air burned in John's lungs. The forest seemed to press in around them. Somewhere to their left, a branch cracked. A hunter was trying to flank them. "We can't keep running like this," John gasped. "There's a shelter," Leary said quickly. "An old place from before I was traded. I can find it in the dark." They pushed deeper into the woods. The snow here was untouched, and the silence felt heavy. Then a sharp worry sound sliced through the air. John turned just in time to see a net streaking toward them. He shoved Leary down, the net catching only empty air before snagging in a branch. The Hunters were closer, now too close. Leary pulled him toward a cluster of rocks half buried in snow. Between them was a narrow opening, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. She slipped inside first, vanishing into the shadows. John followed, the space just wide enough for him to squeeze through. Inside was a small cave, dry and dark. The air smelled faintly of earth and old wood smoke. They pressed against the far wall, holding their breath. Outside, footsteps crunched softly, moving past the entrance. The Hunters were searching, circling. Minutes felt like hours as John kept his grip on the rifle. Leary's breathing was slow, steady, almost unnaturally controlled. Finally, the sounds faded. John exhaled, lowering the rifle slightly. "That was too close," he muttered. "They're testing you," Leary said quietly. "They want to see how far you will go for me." John glanced at her. "And they will come harder next time. They won't just chase. They will corner us." He rubbed a hand over his face, the cold sweat chilling his skin. "This can't keep happening," he said. "We can't just run forever." Her eyes met his in the dim light. "There is still one way to stop them. Without blood," she reminded him. "The life bond." John didn't answer, but he couldn't shake the truth in her words. Out there in the snow, the Hunters were regrouping. Somewhere in the dark, a low, unhurried voice spoke in their language, a command John couldn't understand. Leary shivered, not from cold, but from knowing exactly what that command meant. "They will return," she said. "And next time, they will not miss." The wind carried the smell of snow and something sharper, burnt metal. John knew that smell didn't come from his fireplace. It came from them. The Hunters were back. And this time they weren't hiding. He stood. In the middle of the living room, rifle in hand, Leary was by the fire, wrapping her arms around herself. Her silver-marked skin seemed to glow faintly in the flickering light. "They're close," she said softly, her voice calm but tense, too close to run now. A heavy knock rattled the front door, not the sharp testing kind they had used. Before this was solid, confident, final. John tightened his grip on the rifle. "You stay behind me," he told her. She nodded, but her eyes followed the door like she could already see through it. "Open it, human." A voice boomed from outside. "We are here for what belongs to us." John stepped forward and opened the door just enough to face them. 3 hunters stood in the snow, their hoods back this time. Their faces were a mix of humanoid and alien, angular jaws, ridged brows, faint scales along their temples. Their eyes shone with cold authority. The tallest one spoke, his voice low but dangerous. "You have something that is not yours. Give her to us now, and we will leave you unharmed." John's tone was steady. "She's not yours either." The hunter's lip curled. "She was given to our house. That is ownership." "Not here," John shot back. "Not in my home." The shorter hunter stepped forward, his hand brushing the hilt of a blade at his side. "You cannot fight us. We are trained for the hunt. You are only a man." John raised the rifle slightly, the barrel pointed between them. "I've brought down bigger threats than you." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the cold air. Then the tall hunter's gaze shifted past John into the house, his eyes locked on Leary. "There you are," he said, his voice almost a purr. "You've caused enough trouble. Come quietly, and we might show mercy." Leary stepped into the doorway beside John before he could stop her. Her chin was lifted now. Her posture different no longer, just a frightened runaway. Her voice was clear and commanding. "You will leave," she said, "or you will answer to my blood." The hunters froze. The tall one's expression shifted from smug to uneasy. "You dare claim," he began, but she cut him off. "I do not claim. I state truth," she said. "I am the blood daughter of Lord Varick, leader of the 8th House." John didn't know who Lord Varick was, but the way the hunter's eyes widened told him everything. This name carried weight. The shorter hunter stepped back a half step, clearly unsettled. "If that were true," the tall one said slowly, "you would not be running. You would be in the Lord's Hall." "I ran," Leary said sharply, "because my father saw me as a tool, not a daughter. But by blood, my rights still stand. And by our law, the human who shelters me holds my fate. If you take me now, you break the oldest law of the houses." The tension thickened. John glanced at her. Realizing what she was doing, she wasn't just claiming safety under his roof. She was forcing them into a corner, using their own rules. "You heard her," John said, his voice hard. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me. And from the sound of it, through your own counsel too." The tall hunter's jaw worked. They were dangerous. But even they couldn't openly break their own ancient law without consequences. "This is not over," he said finally, his voice cold. His gaze shifted to Leary. "You think the council will protect you? They will see you as a shame to your father's house." Leary didn't flinch. "I am no longer his shame. I am his problem. And I will make sure the problem grows." The hunters stepped back, the snow crunching under their boots. They didn't turn their backs until they were several paces away. Then, without another word, they melted into the trees, their dark shapes swallowed by the forest. John shut the door and locked it. The adrenaline in his veins began to fade, replaced by a heavy, pounding awareness of what had just happened. "You want to explain what all that was?" he asked. Leary sank onto the rug, her shoulders slumping. "My father commands many hunters. If he knows where I am, he will not stop. But now he must go through the council first. That will slow him. John sat across from her, and, "The part about me holding your fate?" She looked at him steadily. "It's true. If I am under your shelter and you refuse to release me, no house can take me without breaking law." "That sounds a lot like that life bond thing you mentioned," he said. Her eyes softened. "It is. You already have the first part of the bond shelter. The rest is front." Ceremony. John leaned back, rubbing his jaw. He didn't like being dragged into alien politics, but he liked the idea of her being hunted even less. Leary watched him in silence for a long moment before saying, "They will come back, John, and next time. It may not be just hunters." A new beginning. 3 days passed without another knock on the door. But the silence didn't feel safe. It felt like the space between lightning and thunder. Leary stayed close to the fire, always wrapped in a blanket. John kept the rifle loaded and within reach. Even when he slept, the snow outside had grown deeper, burying the path to the road. The world was white and still, but danger felt close on the 4th morning. Leary's head snapped toward the window. "They're here," she said, her voice low. John looked out and saw them, 4 tall figures, walking through the snow. But these weren't hunters. Their clothes were darker, lined with silver patterns that shimmered even in the pale light. They walked with the slow, steady confidence of people who didn't need to hurry. Leary's face was unreadable. "The council," she said quietly. "They've come to judge." John glanced at her. "Judge what?" "Whether I stay with you or go back to my father." A heavy knock came, measured and deliberate. John opened the door to find the 4 council envoys standing in a perfect line. The tallest, a woman with silver hair braided down her back, stepped forward. Her eyes swept over John, then to Leary inside. "You are the human who claims her?" she asked, her voice clear and commanding. "I give her shelter," John replied evenly, "in our law." "That is a claim," the woman said, "but it can be broken if the bond is false." John stepped aside, letting them in. The envoys moved. Like water, silent but unshakable, they formed a half-circle around Leary, who now stood without her blanket, her chin high. "You stand before the council," the silver-haired woman said. "Do you reject or accept the human's claim?" "I accept," Leary said without hesitation. One of the envoys, a man with sharp green eyes, narrowed his gaze. "You ran from your house. That alone dishonors your bloodline." "I ran because my house dishonored me first," Leary replied sharply. "My life is mine, and now it is tied to his." All eyes turned to John. The silver-haired woman asked, "Do you, human, take responsibility for her life? To shelter, protect, and bind yourself to her fate until death?" John's throat tightened. This wasn't marriage the way humans understood it. It was more like swearing an oath in front of a court that could kill you for breaking it. But he saw the way Leary stood, unflinching but holding her breath. "Yes," he said firmly, "I take that responsibility." The woman gave a small nod. "Then the bond is recognized," she said. One of the other envoys stepped forward. Producing a thin silver chain from a pouch, he handed it to John. "Wear this. It marks you as her life bond. No house may take her without your consent. But know this, your enemies are now hers, and hers are yours." John slipped the chain over his head. It was cold against his skin, but somehow heavy with meaning. Leary's shoulders seemed to relax for the first time in days. "It is done," the silver-haired woman said. "The hunters will be recalled. Your claim is law." They turned to leave, but at the door, the Green Knight envoy paused. "You have made a powerful enemy in her father," he said to John, "and powerful enemies have long memories." John met his gaze without blinking. "So do I." When the council left, the house felt strangely larger. Leary sank onto the rug. Pulling the blanket around her again, "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Yes, I did," John replied, setting the rifle back on the wall. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Then I am yours, by law and by choice." For a moment, there was peace. The fire crackled. The snow outside glittered in the pale sunlight. But in the back of John's mind, he knew this wasn't the end. The hunters might be gone, but the man who had sent them, the house leader. Her father would not simply let this go. Leary seemed to sense his thoughts. "There are others like me," she said quietly, "others who ran. Others who never got the chance. We could help them." John looked at her, surprised. "You want to go looking for trouble?" She shook her head. "I want to go looking for freedom." He leaned back in his chair, thinking about it. It was dangerous, suicidal, maybe, but he knew himself well enough to realize he was already considering it. "You've changed my life. You know that?" "Hush," he said. Her eyes met his, steady and unafraid. "And you've changed mine." That's what bonds are for. Outside, the snow kept falling. Covering the hunter's tracks, the forest was quiet again. But John knew it wouldn't stay that way. Somewhere far away, a powerful man was hearing the news and planning his next move, and when he came, John and Leary would be ready. Together, the fire burned bright, and for the first time since she had stepped into his home, Leary looked truly warm.